Welcome back to my garage, where this morning we are smoking Seattle Pipe Club's plum pudding. Sorry, that won't focus, but oh well. This morning we're going to talk about a little poet, playwright. You may have heard of him, William Shakespeare. It's hard to talk about English literature or many other literatures for that matter without talking about Shakespeare. One thing I wanted to do just before we got into a lot of other poems is just to talk about a couple of the sonnets. Shakespeare's pure poetry. I mean, he wrote poetry in his plays, obviously, iambic pentameter throughout, but he did write 154, I think, sonnets. One reason I want to talk about the sonnets is to talk about form. Why he chose to write sonnets, I don't know. They were probably popular at the time. From what I understand, is they may or may not have ever been intended for publication. They got published perhaps without his knowing. I have read before that they were meant to be private, maybe commissioned but told at parties and things like that. A lot of them have inside jokes, which we'll try to get to. Sure, we can't even begin to capture all of the inside jokes because the times are different and they were probably private and may have only been applicable to the people, the audience he intended it for, or himself. But one thing we'll see, we're going to do sonnet 2 and 3. There is some method to the madness of the sonnets. The first 100 or so are generally considered to be written to a young man, perhaps the patron or the son of the patron, or anyway, some young man who won't settle down. And as we'll see with the first 2, the first 20 or so are considered to be the procreative sonnets. I don't know if they have that official label, but they try to convince this man he needs to settle down and have children. Why he won't, I don't know. Maybe he's out gallivanting around, sleeping with prostitutes, not doing anything that would, correlate to starting a family. Shakespeare, as many of you probably know, but just a quick rundown, he lived in the Elizabethan times, so around 1600. I think the sonnets were first published in like 1603 or 4, something like that. And like I said, possibly without his knowledge. And he probably didn't write them in the order that they are presented in most books. He probably or may not have numbered them the way they are numbered. But the thing about the sonnets is if they do sort of follow a pattern in the manner that we receive them. One thing about the sonnets that I wanted to talk about is they kind of like with the Windhover. If you read them, they do sort of get in your memory and tend to percolate up, like I've said about other poems. It'll, especially if you begin to what I call own it, which is maybe not have it memorized, but you know, you know a lot of the lines of various ones. And I recommend a good project to pursue would be to read a sonnet, pick a sonnet, maybe start at the beginning, read it every day for a week, and then move on to the next one. They're short, they're 14 lines long. You can read it in about 30 seconds. And eventually you'll start noticing patterns. You'll notice things in the sonnets that'll stick out. They'll get stuck in your brain, kind of like Windhover does. And you'll start remembering. They are, for the most part, very major part, all in iambic pentameter. When you do run across a section that's not in iambic pentameter, pay attention, see what's going on there. I believe the two today don't deviate from iambic pentameter, but we'll take a look at them. One thing about Elizabethan times and one thing about the sonnets is that, and Shakespeare in general, Shakespeare was a bawdy dude. He could have been considered to have a dirty mind, probably no more so than many people of his day or many people of our day. He thought sexual jokes and innuendo were funny, as do I and a lot of people. Let's look at the comedians that are out today. It's pretty much always been funny. And we'll see some of that here. Not a lot, but definitely some. And some that could be there. But there was censorship in Elizabethan times. Apparently, you had to get anything you wanted published, or like his plays, before he put them on. A censor had to approve them. And for a while, he actually was shut down and wasn't able to produce plays because the censorship was so bad. Something we can see in our own times with the current state of people deciding they want to burn books and ban books and things like that. Just a quick note, if you ever find yourself on the side of wanting to ban books, you're probably not on the good side of history, no matter what your influencers may say. It typically doesn't work out well. And you probably shouldn't be here. We will talk about things that you may consider bannable. We may say words you consider bannable. So, fair warning. And I really have no love lost for people who are all about burning or banning books anyway. So, take that as you will. So he wrote under censorship. So a lot of the jokes can be considered inside jokes. Innuendo is very present, and we'll take a look at that. The sonnets, let's go ahead and take a look at them. They are 14 lines long, even though because of my word wrapping here, it may appear that they're 15 lines in some cases, but it's just a line carried over. But they're 14 lines long. They follow a rhyming pattern of A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, and I guess G, G, or something like that. Anyway, you can see on these that brow, let me go ahead and mark a little yellow, brow, now, field, held, and then, so that's the first 4 lines. Then you get to lies, and eyes, days, praise, etc. So every set of 4 lines carries a sort of an A-B pattern. So that's the form, and within form allows a lot of things. A allows a lot of freedom, really, when you think about it. I mean, if you think of your favorite blues guitarist, blues is a form of music. It follows a fairly rigid pattern. You can kind of break out of the pattern here and there, but for the most part, you stay in that pattern of a 1-4-5 progression, 3 chords with some solos. I've heard one of my favorite blues artists, B.B. King. I've heard him say he only uses 5 notes. He becomes a chef using 5 ingredients. He correlates it to that. But he makes great things out of those 5 notes. Those notes being the pentatonic scale. But regardless, it's a form, and it does make it fairly easy to commit to memory because you have sort of markers there if you sort of get lost, like rather than just being random sentences. When you say a line and the next line is going to be an iambic pentameter, and that if it's the third line of one of these 4, it's going to rhyme with the first one. So let's take a look and we'll talk about that a little more. So I'll read through sonnet number 2 first. When 40 winters shall besiege thy brow and dig deep trenches in thy beauty's field, thy youth's proud livery, so gazed on now, will be a tattered weed of small worth held. Then being asked where all thy beauty lies, where all the treasure of thy lusty days, to say, within thine own deep sunken eyes, were an all-eating shame and thriftless praise. How much more praise deserved thy beauty's use, if thou couldst answer, this fair child of mine shall sum my count and make my old excuse, proving his beauty by succession thine. This were to be new made when thou art old, and see thy blood warm when thou feelst it cold. So, when 40 winters shall besiege thy brow, and dig deep trenches in thy beauty's field, thy youth's proud livery, so gazed on now, will be a tattered weed of small worth held. Now, held and field aren't perfect rhymes. They're close. I don't know if they call it a slant rhyme or whatever. There's a term for it, but what's he talking about here? He's talking about a young man. He's talking to a young man. You could look at it as he's talking to a young woman, and that could be argued. But historical evidence, and not that that's the ending authority on this, dates, claims that these are written to a young man, but feel free to read it as if it's to a young woman. There's some debate could be had, and it could be to either. But we'll take a look. In the first line, he says, when 40 winters shall besiege thy brow. So meaning 40 winters have passed. Now, he could have said 40 summers. He could have said 40 springs. But he did say winters. Winter, and anytime you see a season in a poem, you can kind of look at what does that season imply generally, in nature. Spring being the season of rebirth, summer being the season of sort of aging or maturing, autumn, the season of further aging, getting older, and winter finally being the season of death, when everything dies. If you live in places where there are seasons. But he does use winters here, and poets will refer to seasons frequently, as we will see in our journey through the poems we talk about it. Some of them will turn it on its head, as T.S. Eliot does in The Wasteland. April is the cruelest month, he says. But we can take it here as it's the time of age. So when 40, and also 40 winters is pretty old in this time. I think Shakespeare only lived to 45. So it wasn't like people were typically living to 80 or 90 at the time. So 40 winters has besieged, that's a term of war, siege, besiege thy brow, and digs deep trenches in thy beauty's field. Again, this would be part of a siege, trenches and field, terms of battle. So as the seasons do battle on your body, you age and things start happening. You start getting wrinkles or deep trenches. Then he goes on to say what will happen once these winters have besieged you. Thy youth's proud livery. Now, livery is the clothing of the house. Mainly the servants would wear livery. Also, I think they may have called like the knight's livery. Anyway, it would be the colors that you wore to represent your house. But this is proud livery. So his youth's proud livery that's so gazed on now, because right now this man is young. He's saying, when 40 winters besiege your brow. You're not old yet, but it's going to come, because as it does for all of us, we age, unfortunately. Thy youth's proud livery, so gazed on now, will be a tattered weed of small worth held. We're going to talk about weed and small now. There's I guess it would be an understanding in literature. If it can be sexual, it is. In fact, I read a book one time, and this man is not the first to conceive of this. He just pointed it out, I think, rather succinctly. It's How to Read Literature Like a Professor. I can't remember the guy's name. I'll have to get it. Anyway, it's a great book. Highly recommend it. He has a whole chapter. He says, if it can be about sex or sexual, then it is. It probably is. And then he has another chapter that if it is sex, actual depicted sex, it probably isn't. It's probably talking about something else. And he makes a very good case for both points. But anyway, now weeds throughout Shakespeare, the plays, everything will refer to clothing. He will call clothing weeds. But here he says weed. So any straight object, whether it be a pen or a sword or a weed, you can pretty much think he's talking about a penis. And when he said, it's sort of, this may be the inside joke, is that 40 winters from now, your dick's going to be shriveled up. Your penis is going to be of small worth held. So that's the inside joke, or one of them, I think. If it doesn't strike you that way, fine. But anyway, on the surface, it is talking about his clothes, because it refers to the youth's proud livery, so gazed on now, will be a tattered weed of small worth held. So your beautiful body that is young will turn later to tattered clothes. All right, then being asked, so once the 40 winters have passed and you're asked where all thy beauty lies, where's the treasure of your lusty days? If you were to say then, within thine own deep sunken eyes, within your own eyes, meaning that's all you've got to show for it is what you are now, is your body that you have now, it would be a shame and thriftless, right? If that's all you had to show for your beautiful youth, and in this case considered pretty much wasted, if you don't go procreate. How much more praise deserved thy beauty's use, if thou could answer, this fair child of mine shall sum my count and make my old excuse. So if you were to have a child, that would be the sum of your youth. That would be what you put your youth to use for, would be in finding a wife, having a child. And then, as he says, this will be to new made when thou art old, and see thy blood warm when thou feelst it cold. So as you get older, you can look back on your child and take pride in passing your youthfulness and beauty down to that child. Okay, so let's take a look at the next one, and we'll see a lot of similarity. Like I said, these are part of the what are generally considered procreation sonnets. I'll read through it real quick. Look in thy glass and tell the face thou viewest. Now is the time that face should form another, whose fresh repair, if now thou not renewest, thou dost beguile the world, unbless some mother. For where is she so fair, whose uneared womb disdains the tillage of thy husbandry? Or who is he so fond will be the tomb of his self-love to stop posterity? Thou art thy mother's glass, and she in thee calls back the lovely April of her prime. So thou through windows of thine age shalt see, despite of wrinkles, this thy golden time. But if thou live remembered not to be, die single, and thine image dies with thee. Okay, so pretty much the same thing. Look in the mirror. Glass is going to be mirror. An old way they used to refer to it. May have been all the glass they had at the time was a mirror. Maybe some windows. Windows probably for the wealthy. Also mirrors as well. Look in thy glass and tell the face that you see there, meaning yourself. Now is the time that face, you, the person you see there, yourself, should form another. You should have a child. Whose fresh repair, if now thou not renewest, so if you don't take action now, you will beguile the world and unbless some mother. So you take away the joy from the world by not spreading your seed, so to say. And then he goes on to say, for where is she so fair whose uneared womb disdains the tillage of thy husbandry? So whose uneared means, I believe, unplanted or untilled, basically just soil, the land as you would see it, untouched. So her womb being untouched. And is there who is so fair that she would turn you down from becoming the mother of your children or having sex with you? A lot of sonnets were written in attempt to have sex with women or convince the women, or at least that's what the speaker was saying. Was the speaker's goal was to try to get the woman to open up to him. But in these, not necessarily that, but it is the case in a lot of sonnets. Or who is he so fond will be the tomb of his self-love. So if all you do is self-love, you're not going to spread your seed. And stop, in doing so, you would stop posterity. Who are you to do this? Then he goes back, and sort of like the other one, he says, your mother's old, but she sees in you her lovely April. And coincidentally, this is what T.S. Eliot will call the cruelest month. Although April we tend to think of as, the epitome of spring and rebirth and fresh flowers and rain that brings Mayflowers. So she sees the lovely April of her prime. So thou through windows of thine age shall see, despite of wrinkles, this thy golden time. So you'll see, if you were to go have a child, you would see your spring reflected there. And all of this has to do with like reflection. The mother is reflecting, can reflect on him and see her April. And through the windows, again, more glass, windows, glass, mirror, the windows of his age, he can look through instead of looking in the mirror now and seeing his beauty. He can look through the windows of age and see, in spite of wrinkles, which if we look back, this is what the trenches are. In spite of wrinkles, this is your golden time. Golden being like golden years also, because you have reproduced and can look back and see your April of your prime. But if you desire not to be remembered, die single and you take your image with it, because you're going to die. You're going to age. And you can think maybe he's giving some advice to this young man who, youth tends to not, not realize it's going to age. I think back when I was a teenager and did a bunch of stupid things because you don't care about tomorrow. You don't think you're going to die. Death hasn't entered your mind yet because you're still young. Your body's young. There's no aches and creaks and wrinkles. So you don't think about this. So this is sort of, I think, like a warning maybe to this young man, telling him to get on it. Get out there and find a wife, reproduce, go have sex, and, a sex that will produce progeny and give you something to look back on when you're old and you can see the youth. So that's the sonnet. And like I said, this is the more just to talk about the sonnets in general. And I would like, I will talk about more sonnets, especially some of the more popular ones as we go through. But one, I just wanted to bring up the form because we had not read any poems so far that really have a standardized form, at least as hard and fast as these are, because all of these sonnets, all 154, for the most part, like I said, there are some differences, but they stick to iambic pentameter, they stick to 14 lines, and they stick to the same rhyme scheme. And this will help too if you were to commit to these and wanted to make them yours. Read one a day. Start with number one, read it for about 6 or 7 days, move to the next one. See how it gets in your mind and how you start thinking of it, at random times, or how you can, when you do remember a line, you can sort of fill in the blanks and get those missing lines because of the form and how the form helps. Homer was an oral, all the works of Homer were oral tales. The Iliad, the Odyssey, the Bible was orally handed down hundreds of years before it was written down. And all of these people remembered these things. And so I've got to think that rhyme and meter had a purpose, especially in these days where this would have been really prevalent. You would have had a sonnet form. There may have been, Sidney sonnets or Petrarch sonnets or something, but you would have had a sonnet form that would sound familiar, even though it may sound strange to us now. These would stand out. So that's kind of what I'm recommending. Just try to get into a sonnet form, and there's no better sonnets to get into it with than Shakespeare. And your mind will sort of start seeing, being able to fill in the blanks, and you don't have to remember the whole poem. You can get by with just a few lines, and then your mind will be, oh, well, he's talking about procreation. It's got to, it starts narrowing it down because the next line has to rhyme with brow, so I'm like, well, and not that you'll be doing this overtly, but your mind does some strange things, some crazy, incredible things. And if you were to do this, you would see, you might be surprised. Anyway, that's my recommendation. Do with it what you will. I wanted to talk about Shakespeare one because he's Shakespeare, and you can't really go too long in talking about English literature without talking about Shakespeare because so much of Shakespeare we're going to see in other films. I'll try to point it out, and there's probably many times that I'll even miss it. But and the sonnets are very, very beautiful poems, and worth taking a look at. This has been Pipes and Poetry. I appreciate you listening, and go read some sonnets. Thanks. Please like and subscribe if you liked the video. I would appreciate it. Thank you.